All right, it is 9 o'clock. I'm going to pass, Carl, it is all yours. Folks, it's Carl Zimmerman with the state of Connecticut and OPM presenting Finding Hidden Data Gems in the Connecticut Parcel Data Sets, also presenting with Leah Hodges, who I see is on. Hi, Leah. All right, the stage is yours.
Great. And you can see the CT Parcel data splash screen. All right, great. So actually, this is Leah's show, not my show. So Leah has done all the serious work on parcels for our office. She has spent basically the entire time she's been here working on cleaning up, harmonizing, and systematizing the parcel data set. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit of the state process, and then we're also going to talk about once you have 1.25 million parcels and 140 attributes, which Mike Tola was heavily involved in the schema development on that side for the CAMA data. So once you have, let's see, that works out to be close to 150 to 200 million different pieces of data. What can you do with it? And so I'll show some fun things that we've tried with the data set, and then encourage you all to try out some stuff on your own with the big parcel data set. So with that, I'll leave it to Leah. I guess I've got the controls, Leah, so you say next slide when you need it. Okay?
Next slide, I guess.
Very good.
That's just...
I'll just quickly mention this. We are from OPM, which was founded in 2022, and we do have the expectation that will help with standards, coordination, training, and other infrastructure activities, including parcels.
Okay, so just a really quick and brief overview of what happened last year. So the towns were notified that parcel submissions for the 2023 data were due May 1st of last year. In the 2023 collection, 165 towns submitted CAMA data and 147 submitted parcel data. For this data set, if no entry was submitted, we used historical 2022 data to fill in the gaps and holes. For the CAMA data, only about 3 towns used historical data, with 1 town having no historical data to date of the 2023 collection, and 22 towns use historical data for parcels in 2023. When the process was happening in 2023, there was no parcel schema established for towns to adhere to. You can go to the next slide. But on the other hand, the CAMA does have a schema that was implemented prior to the 2022 collection, when the CAMA was collected and submitted by IGPP without consolidation and posted for the public. The schema was created and designed by the CAMA creation working group. It took a couple of years to get down. The chart below showcases the improvement in the compliance submissions to the schema, with 125 towns complying in 2022 and 138 towns complying in the 2023 collection. Just quick asterisk on the non-compliant. If the town submitted the 136 columns we asked for, but then they added additional columns we did not ask for, they were marked as non-compliant in last year's collection. Like I said before, the parcels at the time of processing had no standardized schema, and they had the most variation of what the data was available for the parcels and how the data was named. So for the 2023 collection, we decided to field map those parcels instead of creating a big code, because the naming variations were, in my opinion, just too great to make a big code that I might only end up using once. So the minimum fields we took for the parcels were editor, edit date, location, shape, length, and shape area, and whatever field was identified as the linking field in the metadata survey filled out by the COGs prior to submitting for the year. Town census codes were also added to the beginning of those link fields. This was done to ensure that all parcels identified were unique and had no duplicates. We also made no changes to the original parcel geometry, so any overlaps or gaps are still present and can be seen. The data set in of itself ended up being 1.25 million parcels. For the CAMA, like stated before, since a schema was established, there has been improvements to submissions. So that was able to be done programmatically with the help of the before mentioned metadata that helped create the linking field to join the two data sets together. The code that was created made headers uniform, added census codes, link fields once the link field was created or made depending on the information provided. After that was done, everything besides the minimum attributes that we wanted to keep were dropped off the CAMA data set, which ended up, we only ended up keeping 37 columns out of the 136. The process that to complete took about 6 months with a few problems rising here and there, mostly revolving around the lack of uniformity in the CAMA data, but mostly the parcels. And there was a few issues with duplicates, but that was an easy fix by just using the identify duplicate tool in Arc Pro and just taking one of the entries, and we ended up with the proper amount of entries after the join. You can go to the next slide. To accompany the data set, a parcel landing page was created for easy access to the data set. The page provides more information on the background and creation. There's also links to download the data by individual COGs and a small preview of the data set to interact with, and links to the previous year's collections, which will take you to the open data portal where those zip files reside. Go to the next slide. Also on the landing page is the first iteration of our parcel viewer. So if you want to just do a simple lookup of a town or area, right now it has like the standard functionality of searching for addresses, zooming into COGs or into specific towns, zooming in out of the map, and choices of base maps for your viewing. And if you click on a parcel, it provides you with the CAMA and parcel minimum that we took from the data set. You can also download the parcel data set there as well. You can go to the next one. So wrapping up last year, the data set was released early February of 2024. This graphic shows you all the requests and traction it has gotten. Since it's been uploaded to AGOL. The service itself gets about 18,000 requests per day, and like just yesterday I checked and it was it had about 20,000 requests.
Now I'll just say interrupt you real quick, Leah. This is the power of having authoritative data sets with schemas and standards. People start relying on it and it gets a lot of use and a lot of bang for the dollar.
So moving on to this year's collection, we created a new parcel and CAMA collection page. It has been now moved from the IGPP page to the GIS office page. There's additional information regarding both the schemas and crosswalks for both the CAMA and the parcels, links to and also links to previous year's data and this year's current data. Go to the next slide. We spoke about before how we used the metadata survey from last year. For this year's collection, we created a dashboard for collecting metadata from towns, which can be located on the parcel and CAMA page. This was used as a tool to help not only us, but the COGs keep track of where we were in the collection process. And it shows our emphasis on the linking fields, because there's our gauges to show how many submitted viable link fields for both the CAMA and the parcels. So after last year's collection, we discussed and made some useful changes to the data requests. For instance, the CAMA, we added a new field called suppression. We wanted to ensure that records that need to be suppressed are continued to be suppressed, and there were no gaps in getting the data to us. And the biggest change for this year was the creation of the parcel schema, which had a total of 12 fields. Besides the default fields of the object ID, shape area, shape length, we asked for parcel ID, town name, editor, edit date, editor comment, location, parcel type, unit type, and the link to the CAMA data. We just started the process for this year's collection, but the schema has already helped us process significantly because we are already 2/3 of the way through in about not even a quarter of the time that it took last year. So that's I guess a note towards schemas and using them. Also coming soon, there will be a data improvement initiative to help the process of getting and keeping our data better. It will focus on match rates, recency, and other data completeness. This will be done by leveraging the findings and the data provided to us by the COGs to create funding for municipalities.
All right. Thank you, Leah. So Leah unfortunately had to do the wonky part of the presentation. I get to do the fun part, and what you're about to see only exists because Leah did all this hard work. So what we're going to look at now is how to think about the parcel data and CAMA data together and what you can grab from it to create new or derivative data sets. The beautiful thing about the parcel data set is the only neighborhood level source of information in Connecticut. There's a whole group of bureaucrats and planners who never look at anything below the block or tract level. And this gives you a chance to analyze things at much finer scales and then aggregate back up. So I'll show a few SQL queries, and then we'll cover a little bit of spatial statistics with the time remaining. All right. So the first thing to remember again is that we have these geometry and assessment data sets, about 1.25 million parcels. They cover a range of attributes, but ID, address, owner, assessment, appraisal, land, and building are the kind of the big categories. And then within that, there are all sorts of detailed descriptions, such as acreage, condition, different aspects like the number of stories, area. And all these things then can be analyzed either in an SQL query or some kind of spatial statistic for your problem. So the first interesting analysis I did using this was a text search of all things. I had never done this before, but I was presented with a problem from Department of Environmental Protection. They wanted to know how to estimate the 21% open space requirement that comes from the statutes. And one of those parts of the statute is that the land must be owned either by a water company or a qualified conservation organization, which is that in this case means a land trust. So as you would do in any project, I went out and looked for a land trust map. And guess what we found? There is none. The only thing that's available is a PDF with 129 organizations and no parcel level information. So on the right, you see basically the tag for the attribute, but not what's happening by parcel. So the question is, how many parcels do these land trusts own, and where are they in Connecticut? No one knows the answer to that. And so this data set was used as the basis for that analysis. So there are a few places like Canton. If you ever get a chance to go hiking in the Canton Land Trust, very, very beautiful river gorges up in the northeast and northwest part of Canton. They do have a little GIS. A few other towns do too, but most of this data is not available and certainly not in a single location. So I wrote this really long and involved SQL query, and I used all sorts of different variations on words like land trust, land underscore trust, land trusts with an S, conservation trust, environmental leaning, and so on. Because what I was trying to do is tap the ownership list. And you can see this is my return from this query here. And look how nicely this picked up the land trusts on the right. The Deep and the Greenlands program had a vendor coming, but what they needed was a methodology to first groom and select out where to look, and this was that basis for that methodology. And I came up with 5,100 parcels, and there are, of course, some false positives and false negatives. Again, we have a vendor to clean up the remaining, but we feel very good that this captured the core gist of the land in land trust in Connecticut. So in about an hour's worth of work, I was able to estimate where all the land trusts were in Connecticut at a fairly high accuracy with this data set. Very nice tool. And, so the next one is a problem that we came upon with the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue wants to know where commercial properties are, and they don't have. There is no single commercial property data set in the Connecticut's. And so I did a simple SQL query using a variety of different names that LCs come under. LC is a tax bracket, tax structure, actually. And if you have a little LLC and you have a side business like mowing lawns or GIS consulting, it keeps you from being sued and being bankrupt, basically. So it acts as a firewall to lawsuits. And it also, LLCs tend to be hard to identify what properties they own. And so the tax people don't necessarily know where LLCs are operating. So I did use this query and found 90,000 parcels. There are some very interesting trends. This one is in Waterbury, and these are all the parcels that were part of LLCs. And to me, this suggests that these are all, almost all these are rental properties owned and operated. And so sort of a accessory analysis, you could use this as a way to find rental properties. And then, it also kind of creates a topology of land use. This is the Route 1 corridor from Fairfield down to Norwalk. And you can see how nicely it pops out the main commercial strip along here. And I don't have a slide of this, but right along the Connecticut River, there's a lot of surprisingly LLCs in the farmland. And probably those are the big commercial farm operations that are in the state, which is a rather limited number, but nonetheless, there was a definite bunch of activity in the Connecticut River corridor. Okay, so this is very straight SQL query. Now let's talk about spatial statistics, and from the simplest to most complicated method. Basically, these are metrics that allow you to characterize the distribution of patterns across space, and there are descriptive versions like identifying a centroid among a bunch of different polygons. The deterministic ones where you basically have a mechanical interpolator, which you'll see IDW shortly. And then there are statistical ones that both have local and general analyses. And they most typically look for patterns or clusters, usually clusters. And then they provide some kind of statistical estimate on whether they're significant or not. That means in a statistical sense, are they unique? So the first analysis we'll look at here, this is looking at 1.25 million parcels of the sale price across the entire state. So this is a interpolation of all the parcels in Connecticut. What I did was I took the parcel data, converted to points, and then analyzed the points. And so a couple of interesting trends. First of all, obviously the Northeast and Northwest are not as wealthy. There are a lot of properties there that are under $100,000 when they're sold. There are some hot spots in Hartford, Farmington Valley, and of course on the Gold Coast where Mike is, WestCOG, and then a few of the bigger urban towns. But I want to talk a little bit more about this little cluster in the north, in the west central part of the state near New Milford, and also down around Greenwich and Stamford, where I used to work at WestCOG. This one is really interesting. You see there are a bunch of houses here that are over $1 million. And you think, this is out in the middle of nowhere in the woods. What would that be? Well, let's take a look at that. So these are Washington and Roxbury. And it turns out if you know anything about Washington, which is this little kind of resort and prep school town in the middle of plateau above the river in Washington, there are a lot of very nice houses, and I have had the fortune of looking at the addresses and ownership in that, and it turns out about half the people who own properties there work in New York City and Manhattan. So this is probably a enclave for New Yorkers who come out for the summertime or work remotely. Now let's look at the, this is still the IDW. It's an interpolate mechanical or deterministic interpolation. Let's look at the pattern here. Obviously, Greenwich is wealthy. Greenwich is lit up with the properties of 3 million or more. Stamford has a hot spot near downtown, but a lot of it is in that sort of near sub $1 million sale price. New Canaan and Darien are again up over $1 million, and Westport and Norwalk is the intermediate. Now, I asked you, do you think the name of the town matters when people are selling property? So, anyone want to venture a guess? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, let's probe this a little more. We're going to use this data set that we have to see if this holds up. So now I'm going to use bathrooms per dwelling as a proxy. And while there is a relationship between price and bathrooms per dwelling, Greenwich has a whole bunch of homes with 4, 5, and 6 bathrooms. Those tend to be very expensive, and you can see they correspond nicely with the very wealthiest houses. And then places that have 1 or 2 bathrooms, like in South Stamford, are also tend to be lower value, but there are exceptions. And I'll point out Stamford downtown has a hotspot of very high-priced houses. Probably that's commercial. But let's look at New Canaan here. This is interesting. New Canaan has lots of houses over $1 million. Most of the houses are over $1 million, and some quite a bit higher. But New Canaan does far fewer of these, 5 and 6 bathroom houses. There are some, but not as many. So there is some pattern, but you'd have to dive into the data deeper to fully establish whether the name of the town corresponds with higher values or whether it's the amenities of the house that matter. To continue this line of thought one more time, we have a comparison between price and bathroom in around my neck of the woods in Simsbury, Bloomfield, West Hartford, and Avon. This is west of Hartford. Simsbury has a lot of houses from 1970 to 2000 with 1 to 2 bathrooms, and maybe a third. Avon, Bloomfield, and West Hartford are similar. But if you look at the pricing differences in Bloomfield, you have a pretty, even though the number of 3 bathroom houses is pretty high, there's a noticeable drop in the pricing value. And then when you drop into West Hartford, the property values go back up. So around here, it may be that there is certain towns where price is dependent on the name of the town. Mixed bag, but this data set allows you to probe that question, and then you could do statistical analysis further. Okay, let's look at some spatial statistics. This is called the GEDIS orb. It's basically a local hotspot analysis. And it allows you to see where there are clusters of things that are high value or lower value. And you can see that where we just looked before, according to this analysis, there's definitely a hotspot in Southwest Connecticut, not surprising. The areas around Torrington and Bristol tend to be much lower. And on the east side of Hartford, there's also in parts of Tolland, there are also low-level clusters. And then there's some areas that are much closer together. Let's take a look at one of those. Leah knows Bridgeport well, and she was telling me about what Bridgeport's like. And you can see here, this is kind of this inverted donut pattern. Right near the coast, you have a high hotspot. This is where there's a bunch of clustered higher values. Then you have no values in a cluster of lower values. And Leah tells me this pretty much matches up the development pattern in Bridgeport. And then, as many of you know, if you go down the 95 corridor, Bridgeport changes very rapidly. The characteristics of property pricing change very rapidly when you go from Bridgeport into Fairfield. So this all kind of makes general sense, but this gives you a way of looking at different kind of gross trends of property values. Okay, now let's look at a another type of cluster and outlier analysis. This is called the Anselins. And this one, you have a couple different things going on. You have both an outlier analysis, those are things that are way out on the statistical mean, and you have clusters. So the orange color is a high cluster. That means you have a group of higher value houses together, and that's within a mile. And then you have a low cluster, and then you have purple is not significant. So let's first look at Hartford. Hartford is interesting because, first of all, you have lots and lots of houses that are not significant. But then you have a few pockets of these high clusters. One's in the north end of Manchester. I think Rich can tell us what's going on there. We have one in downtown. We have a small pocket in West Hartford, and then we have one in Farmington and Simsbury along the commercial areas. These are probably commercial properties. The interesting thing about Hartford, it's the only place in the state that has both a high cluster and then low-high outliers. These are houses that are significantly below the surrounding values. So almost all of Connecticut is either in the purple or these red, but only Hartford and a little bit of Bridgeport and New Haven have any undervalued houses, maybe suggesting the housing market is pretty well priced right now. So let's look at New Haven, and New Haven also had a very interesting pattern. Generally, all these purple indicate there are no significant values. The red are considered higher than the surrounding cluster. But right in downtown New Haven, you have a cluster of higher highs, then followed by a band of low-high outliers. So that suggests that there's a gradient between high value and lower value houses, and that it's pretty stark in New Haven, which matches, I believe, the character of the town as well in terms of the property. Mike, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in. We're getting close to 9:30, and I want to make sure you had an opportunity for some questions.
Yes, I will. I'll wrap it up. These are the rest are bonus slides, so I'll finish up. Last one, just want to show you. This is the Gold Coast showing high values, and again, we see that Stanford and Norwalk don't have them, but New Canaan did. So a different analysis suggests that New Canaan, in fact, was higher by geography. And then last thing is, we need to work as a state to combine other data with parcels, addressing, building, land covers, and other to use as proxy for analysis. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carl and Leah. Excellent presentation. Now, we're going to have a break later on. So if people have additional questions we don't get to right now, we can ask them then. But from the group, are there questions? You can either write in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can call on you now. All right, I certainly have a question. Have you been working with suppressed data? I know that was something that came up for us, like trying to suppress certain sets of data set for like judges and folks, or is that something that has that come up at all? Suppressing property data in the CAMA resource?
I think Leah, you worked
Yeah.
there, right?
All data is supposed to come to us suppressed, so it should be suppressed, is what I'm saying. So the suppression field is just to double check that it is suppressed.
Got it. Okay.
So it should be already suppressed when it gets to
Yes,
us.
that's what I figured. All right.
Yeah.
And then Bruce Willett asked that are these available on ArcGIS Online? So then he can just kind of like stream it. These layers, the camo layers, the parcel layer that you made.
Yeah. The parcel layer is on AGOL. You can get the API and just put it right into what you're doing.
Excellent.
If you have the landing page, you can get the service off that landing page.
I will
All
put
right.
the landing page.
Bruce
in
is
the
excited. Thank you. And then I know I'm excited for seeing that statewide data set. You know, towns were making these viewers, then COG started to make these viewers. It's nice to see now the state is making the viewer. And so I look forward to seeing that progress. And my vision is that our towns can be using the state viewer and we can get the best bang for our buck for our taxpayers and our users and give them a good service. So I like the way it looks. I was just checking it out. I think it looks wonderful and look forward to seeing that grow. All
That's definitely
right.
something we're looking at doing.
Yes, and Carl, you've certainly come a long way on this project, having worked at the kind of the inception at the COG level. So it's nice to see you in the driver's seat, working with Leah, making it happen at the state level. So thank you very much. Round of virtual applause for Carl and Leah. I'm now going to segue to our next presenter. It's Adem Aricanli with WestCOG. He is a Princeton intern. It's a program that we're part of where we have interns from Princeton come join us, and we set them up with a project to work on for the summer. And this year, you're going to see Adem's project as he presents. He did get into some GIS topics. He did not come with a background in GIS, but he picked it up pretty quickly. We had him work directly next to our GIS staff members. So there's some GIS components that you'll see. And of course, on solar, there's always a lot of GIS considerations. So we welcome you, Adem.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, hi all. I'm Adem. I was brought into WestCOG this summer to do an analysis on the residential solar landscape in the Western Connecticut region. Basically, WestCOG is curious on what the current state of solar is in the region and compared to the state, what factors might be motivating residents to be switching to solar, because solar is, according to some of the research that WestCOG has done, or residential solar specifically, is a very viable option for sustainable energy for, the next few decades to come. And so they want to try and accelerate growth of solar as much as possible. The project that I did was a balance of data collection, interviews, analysis on this data, and then the ultimate final product will be a report on solar in the region, driving factors, and a discussion of how we can use that to motivate how we approach promoting solar in the future. And this will all be in a report available from WestCOG. It should be complete in the next week or two and available shortly after that. And that'll be available to towns and municipalities. And then just WestCOG itself is an organization that, a planning organization that helps advise the towns and governments of the 18 towns and municipalities in southwestern Connecticut region, which is a very diverse region. I think just in the previous slideshow, you kind of saw an example of that. You have very busy urban areas in the south, and it gives way to much more rural areas in the north with a completely different landscape, different demographics. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic. And so the components of this project, the focus, we want to look mainly at residential and rooftop solar in Connecticut. There have been around 60,000 to 70,000 installations of this since its inception about 20 years ago. Installations have been increasing steadily throughout the past 5-ish, 6, 7 years now. It's pretty linear, but the specific need is because if we look at solar installations by town, when adjusted to population density, we find that the Western Connecticut region has far less solar compared to all other regions in the state. And so that's why WestCOG is particularly interested in trying to figure out what makes solar popular and why is it maybe not as popular in Western Connecticut. And that's what the mission of the project is. We want to find all those factors. We want to find out if it's behavioral, or if there's something we can attribute to, such as roofs in this area aren't as friendly for solar, or the people who switch to solar fall under a specific category, and we need to target them more. For this project, I started by conducting interviews with town officials, solar installers, and Connecticut sustainable energy officials. Basically create an idea of what solar is like right now before we dive into any data, just so we can understand what's going on. From there, we then used data that was compiled by WestCOG and some that I found and made myself from online sources, from the state, census information, etc. And conducted all that analysis using ArcGIS, which I picked up once I got to WestCOG and had a great time filling around with because of kind of the graphical, or not graphical, the way I could see data instantly in maps and use that to guide my preliminary investigations so that I could get an idea of what factors were important. We use Microsoft Excel, Python as well, just to further mine through the data and try and get an idea of what's going on. Data collected came from Connecticut's Public Utilities Regulation Authority, and also the Connecticut Green Bank, which had a program called the Residential Solar Installment Program, which was very prevalent from 2012 to 2022, and they collected data on almost every residential solar install that was done through them, about 50,000 data points. So those two sets provided us a lot of information to work with. And then the team was myself, Mike at WestCOG, Tucker at WestCOG, who's the data scientist I work closely with, and then Charles Vittich and Francis Pickering, who provided a lot of useful insights from their previous knowledge on solar. And so for the project, we had a lot of initial considerations, both at the state and regional level. We wanted to understand what factors drove solar uptake, what factors might affect individuals' decisions to switch to solar, whether there might be restrictions on a local basis, whether certain providers might be working more in one town than another. And these were all of note just because we've kind of saw that it wasn't a very uniform trend across the state. So we wanted to understand what the true difference was. Another consideration was how accessible is solar throughout the region. If we simply lack manpower in this region to do the work, or if there are any other bottlenecking factors, and then also to try and understand what's worked well in the past. And so just to start some of the initial conclusions so that you have an idea of what we found. First and foremost, we found that Connecticut residents were economically motivated to transition to solar. This first was motivated by seeing a map comparing solar density to census tract information on median income, and overlaying the two basically showed a very similar distribution throughout the whole state. And so further data analysis showed that there's a strong correlation between solar installments and the median income of an area. And so this made sense to us because in Connecticut, there are incredibly high electricity rates for residents compared to the rest of the country. And so these high rates might make solar, which seems like a difficult or expensive transition to make, especially in Connecticut where terrain is varying and weather falls off in the winter, you have less sunlight, it might still be more economical because of this high need from electricity costs. We also found that residents were not motivated by geographic factors that we deemed favorable, such as houses that are oriented to be with the sunlight, or houses with larger roofs. Previous WestCOG research done by Charlie has kind of shown that if you optimize your house for solar, you can benefit a lot more from it. But we found that residents didn't seem to pick up on that yet. Residential solar is a personal decision. We see that a lot of factors compound into it. And then through some simple analysis, we also see that some towns benefit well from targeted solar programs, but not necessarily are not necessarily likely to switch by themselves. And so, yeah, the tools and methods throughout this project procedure was contact local officials, look at the data, look at some maps, see what it's telling us, see what factors might be of interest, and combine that with what I learned from communicating with people to see what factors might be worth diving deeper into with a deeper analysis using Python, trying to create some regression models to understand whether some factors were more significant than others. So here on the screen, I have some of some of the simple data that we used in ArcGIS. So this was data compiled by Tucker at WestCOG. And so on the top here, we have building footprints, which was available for all the Western Connecticut region. And these helped us to be able to identify how large buildings were, how much solar exposure they received, how much daylight they received. And so that when we were able to link our solar installation points to these buildings through the state parcels, that allowed us to understand the buildings with solar versus those without solar. Here on the bottom right, we have a distribution of solar throughout the state of Connecticut. And so you can see that it's very popular along the urban regions, Here we have Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, and it kind of follows that I-91 and then I-95 trend all the way to the bottom of the state. And then you can see slightly less dense installments all around. And so, yeah, GIS, I think for the first 4 weeks of my project was the tool that I was constantly opening up the most and fiddling around with and trying to create new statistics to try and visualize. One challenge I found, sorry, let me expand my screen here. There we go. So when working with the data more, I think one challenge that came up was trying to establish metrics that we could properly assess solar density and adoption with. I found that trying to categorize solar with units. So initially the metric was units per 1,000 capita throughout either census tracts or towns. And this was helpful when comparing versus raw units installed in a census tract or a town, because some places are more population dense than others. Some places have a lot more land area than others, and we need a way to be able to truly understand what's going on. So that we can compare a city as large as Hartford or New Haven versus a town as small as Bridgewater or Sherman in Western Connecticut. And so I found these two maps interesting. On the top left here, we have solar density when it's normalized to population density. And on the bottom, we have solar density when it's normalized to what is defined by the census as an owner-occupied household. So you can see similar trends between the two. But specifically in Western Connecticut, I found that there was slightly more density in some areas when you looked at owner-occupied households versus population density. And it was nice to be able to visualize that just with this map here. And then this graphic depicts the trend between the two statistics. And you find that it's very linear and they're similar in some regards, but there's some very high outliers here that remind us that we need to consider both statistics when looking at certain places. And these pertain to urban areas where there are many people, but more renter-occupied households and less owned households. So this was one interesting challenge I found throughout the project that I had to keep in mind. Some of the analytical methods we used a lot was done on GIS. In addition to just visualizations, also created some new data and used tools in order to understand some factors. So on the top left here, there is an analysis on the angle of streets where solar is installed. So what I did was I found all solar units installed within, I think it was 50 to 75 meters of a roadway. And I linked every point to the nearest point on the roadway to that solar installation, so that I could then take the angle of the roadway at that point, and that would tell us the street angle that the solar unit was installed on, with the idea being that an angle that is more east to west oriented has more alignment with the sun and therefore produces more electricity throughout the day. Whereas one that is north to south oriented will receive the least sunlight throughout the day and be the least favorable to solar. So this allowed us to get a count on how many systems that are oriented with the roadway were east to west oriented versus north to south or angled. And the conclusion of this analysis was actually surprising in that we found that there wasn't much correlation at all and that residents were not interested in the orientation of their roadway. Additionally, on the bottom right here, I tried to understand whether systems were more likely to be installed near major roadways. So I created a buffer and analyzed all that, and we found that solar installations were more likely, but that was solely due to population density. So overall, there was no significant trend. Some of the results we found are depicted here. On the top left here, we have a trend of income versus solar installs. And we can see that in lower income census tracts, there are fewer installs. And as we move up, we get much more solar density. And this trend is filtered to be below $60,000 because we find that in census tracts with median income above this level, they'd fall off significantly, leading us to believe that solar is very economically motivated. You can see on the green points, which are Western Connecticut towns, we aren't able to see as much solar adoption as the rest of the state, especially here where WestCOG is clustered, but the rest of the state is clustered up here. We also found that on the bottom right here, solar was when solar systems across the town were more expensive, there were also more raw installations per town. So the urban areas with the most solar installs actually installed the most expensive systems, even though they're not the highest income towns in the state, which is fascinating. And finally, there was high seasonal variation with solar trends, leading us to believe that warmer weather, better weather, motivated people to switch. When assessing the data, we had to keep in mind plenty of different things, such as residential solar is a very complicated issue. One correlation isn't going to tell us the entire story, and we have to consider the population and the landscape that we're working with. The people who live in Western Connecticut aren't the people who live in Hartford, and the landscape of Western Connecticut isn't the landscape of Hartford. So all these things need to be kept in mind so that we can try and understand solar from the viewpoint of the buyer rather than solar as an idealized method of generating electricity, because we found that it isn't treated as that yet. And additionally, we want to make sure that we are applying our data to the correct populations that we're analyzing. This is a quick review of our conclusions, but I'll move through here because we already kind of talked about those at the beginning. For further investigation, some considerations, it'd always be great to have more data or more specific data. One trouble or one issue I had when working was, I think we were working with 2022 parcel data, and it was very difficult to be able to adequately combine data across towns into one picture for Western Connecticut, because different towns had different ways of assessing, say, the quality of a house or a roof type. Sometimes you'd have words, other times you'd have numbers. And that was a little frustrating, and different towns had different link IDs in these formats in the system we were using, so that it was difficult to merge all the data together. So I think that ties into the presentation we just had, that maybe doing analysis with the 2024 data might be even more telling. Additionally, the geocoding of the solar points using latitude and longitude wasn't perfect when compared to the roads and building footprints that we were using in WestCOG. So we can't be too reliant on our geographical data there in order to tell us everything, because some points might be slightly off. So we can't use tiny measurements in order to make final decisions. It'd be nice to have access to consumer data to add context specifically on, say, surveys or the financing program or method that residents are using, so we can understand if more people are buying their systems or leasing their systems, how long they're leasing over, and how satisfied they are with solar so far. And with further investigation, we could even possibly build a predictive model to tell us where solar might be most viable, or where it might be most effective to advertise in the future, so that you get the most bang for your buck in terms of effort put in for promotion, as well as being able to tell us where it's worth using predictive models to do our research, whereas it might seem in Western Connecticut, we don't behave with the trend. Maybe the people here aren't being reached by enough providers. They don't have the same mental picture of solar as the rest of the state, and so we can't treat them as the same population as those in northeastern Connecticut, where solar is very popular. And yeah, so from this project, we kind of see that data is very helpful in helping us determine, the ideal circumstances and what we really want to find out if our population was to behave ideally. But we find that a lot of the times they don't. So the data can only tell us so much before we need to remember what we're working with when, at least in this project, we are trying to promote solar, which is, say, trying to sell people cars or houses. It's the same thing. So we can't treat them as points that behave according to a line. We also want to correctly understand the landscape of the area we're working with. Again, electricity prices in Connecticut are some of the most expensive in the country. And so that will mean more for alternative energy sources here than it will in, say, where electricity prices are cheap. We don't want to overinterpret our results, just so that we don't become too fixated on one result. And sometimes not seeing any association can still mean something. So when we saw that the households that adopted solar were very representative of the region as a whole in terms of solar exposure, roof size, income, this told us there weren't any special factors, but that would mean that there's data of interest somewhere else. And finally, even when we don't find association or the data isn't the best, it's still nice to be able to use the tools that we have, make the most of them to generate our understanding for now. This is one of the first projects of this sort that has been done, so we can't expect the data to be perfect, but using what we have in ArcGIS and Excel, trying to curate new data sets, it'll be a first step towards trying to better understand solar and where it can go in the future, so that possibly when we have better data, when we have more enthusiasm from our residents, we can try and conduct even better investigations to help Connecticut reach its sustainability goals in the future. And yeah, now I can quickly open up to questions if anyone has any or any clarifications.
Very good. Thank you, Adam. Round of applause for Adam. And he's only going to be a junior in school, so it's a very impressive work that you've put together, and I applaud you for that. And one thing that really speaks to me is how humbling this project was, as Adam pointed out. We run all this data, we come up with all these great theories about why we're not seeing solar at WestCOG. We start testing them out, and we realize that people are not behaving as the data says they will. So he's like, okay, the roof's in the right direction, it's all along the road, it's perfect, and they're not adopting the solar. So it's very fascinating in that regard. So yes, we're going to open up to questions now. And so if you want to raise your hand or add it in the chat, if you raise your hand, you got a better chance of getting your question answered. Otherwise, I got to find it in the chat. So any questions from the group for Adam? And Adam, you got applauses coming in on the chat as well. Opening question I have for you, Adam, is how much did you know about GIS before you arrived on this project, and what was it like picking up that skill and using it?
I knew of its existence. I had briefly sat in on a class in high school, a college course in high school, while I was in high school, that used GIS. So I kind of saw the interface before, but otherwise I never worked with it. So second day at WestCOG, I think I went onto Google, I looked up like GIS basics, and I understood how to open a new map and add databases and folders into that map. And then working with Tucker and Nick at WestCOG, and then being given the data, I slowly started just being able to find more functionalities, knowing how to navigate it. And that's, the first 2, 3, 4 weeks there where I really learned everything that I used for GIS throughout this project. Okay,
very good. And I'm going to get to Carl next soon. Dave Dixon asking about, is the data going to be posted or summarized in a report, a website or something? And yes, it will. We're going to have a report. We have this recording of a presentation, and still have access to that information. Carl, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. So nice work. So I'm really curious about this. There's not a one-to-one relationship between income and adoption. Is there either household property value or household income that had the highest rate of adoption that you could identify? So is there like a sweet spot? Seems like it's it starts low, it goes high, and then tails back off as people. Is there a sweet spot where you get the highest rate of adoption by either sale price or income?
I would say specifically middle class, from what we see along that 2020 median income, we see that around $40,000 to $60,000 is median income is the most popular. When trying to use property value in order to assess using the parcel data, I ran into issues specifically with trying to filter out large properties that weren't actually residential because one of the data set we had that had geocoded points included some commercial or like public schools as their solar points as well. And so that parcel data will completely throw off our results. So trying to filter through all those provide a little difficulty. And I think once we have a more clean data set that's exclusively residential and parcel data that will be easier to work with and join with our current data, then that'll be a good time to use assess building value in order to see whether those meet the trend of the state or fall to the one direction. I would say you would see that it would be incredibly similar to the median home cost, both because the people who adopt solar do kind of fall right in that bell curve, and also because I think the tails will really average out. Talking to one person in Ridgefield, he said that really large properties, multi-million-dollar mansion type homes aren't really the adopters of solar that they see.
Okay, great, thanks. I think you'll find that the new updated parcel data will be much easier for you to work with.
I was excited to see that as the one right before my presentation because I think that was something I would have appreciated during the project a few weeks ago.
Very good. Any other questions from the group for Adam's presentation? Somebody did notice, Karen Z, you mentioned that people seeking out solar, or if people respond to vendors knocking on doors, you can't capture that. And we thought about that a lot too. We were even wondering, maybe we'll just see random clusters. And we thought about salespeople going to doors. Would you like solar? Oh, Francis.
That
Yeah, go
I think
ahead,
is what you see that's what you'd see in cities as well. Where solar is just far more dense. Especially if you look one town over from a city, there might be a tenth of the installations. So that might be one of the causes for it. Yeah.
Right. All right. Francis Pickering, Executive Director at WestCOG.
Oh, well, I just want to say thanks, Adam. You did a fantastic job. And I think getting back to Carl's comment here, we went into this because we saw that our region we're an outlier in terms of low solar uptake, and we were looking for factors that would predict solar uptake so we perhaps could get more households interested, and we didn't find that solar potential is a factor, right? The factors we thought based on science would be factors weren't factors. One thing we could look at in the future, we don't have the data, is how does household energy use compare to solar adoption? Our suspicion is that many of the higher income households that are not adopting solar probably are among the households with larger carbon footprints in the state. So I think there are some conclusions for policymakers that maybe we need to revisit our policies and kind of start segmenting our targeting of households. So we have a message that appeals also to lower income households and higher income households.
I thought it was interesting because, compared to EV car adoption, this is kind of flipped. So car adoption started with wealthy people and has trickled down the economic ladder, but this seems to be the other way around. So in some ways, it's very good.
It's very interesting because if you have solar panels, you can charge your electric car for free. So that connection doesn't seem to have been made in practice.
Charlie, you have a question?
No, just a comment to the things I've heard. I think, and people may not know it, but the average residential household in Western Connecticut uses 21,000 kilowatt hours a year, whereas the average house in Connecticut, including those in Western Connecticut, is 9,000 kilowatt hours per year. So you have an enormous distinction between the energy use in Western Connecticut and the rest of the state, which gets to Carl's interest in this issue and what I guess Francis just said. I think there's a education factor, but I think there's an aesthetic factor involved with this as well. That some people at least think that solar panels are a clutter on their roof, or they can't do it because they'd have to put it on the ground and they don't like the aesthetics. Plus, if you're making millions of dollars, or let's say billions of dollars, why would you even worry about a 21,000 kilowatt hour bill a year?
Right.
So I think it's, conspicuous consumption is something that they actually like, as opposed to seeing it as a vice.
Very good. Thank you, Charlie. Now I'm gonna actually wrap this up because we got our next presentation going. But if you stick around, we'll have more questions during the break. Thank you, Adam, for your
Oh, thank you
presentation.
for having me. I was
Our
happy to share.
pleasure. Next up, we have Connecticut Cultural Resources Information System, Planning, Portals, and Preservation by Kevin Berger. There's Kevin. Kevin, it's all yours.
Good morning. So I came on to the State Historical Preservation Office. That's what SHPO stands for. And it was this past November. And they started developing this before I got there. And so it is called CONCRIS, and it's Connecticut Cultural Resources Information Systems. Now, a lot of people probably don't know exactly what SHPO is. So the SHPO, it administers a range of federal and state programs that identify, register, and protect the building sites, structures, districts, and objects that comprise Connecticut's cultural heritage. So they preserve all historic sites, and there is a SHPO in every state, and every well, maybe not every, but in a lot of acknowledged Native American tribes also have TIPOs. And so back after Hurricane Sandy, the state found, and FEMA found, that a lot of these along the coastline, a lot of these historic properties were endangered, one by climate and just other factors, obviously. But Hurricane Sandy showed how much of the storm surge can affect some of these homes and buildings, and even underground burial sites. And so the state received money to begin digitizing. So all the southern counties were digitized prior to my coming on. And then in 2020, as a result of COVID, and when everybody was out of office and people needed to get the data, and all the data that the state had was on paper documents, they really made a push to digitize the rest of the state data that was on file in our office, and then also a lot of these files are also stored at the Dodd Center at UConn. In 2020, there's two of my coworkers, Jenny Schofield and Kathy Labadia, teamed up with Dewberry to really get on the digitizing and then also creating the application. So what CONCRIS is obviously it's a geodatabase that has all the above ground and below ground historical, architectural, and archaeological resources in the state mapped out. We have also incorporated a bunch of filters and everything to make it easier for people to kind of self-service. And there's still some things that haven't been digitized, but for the most part, almost everything is now in a digital format. Per week, we probably receive 200 plus inquiries between tax credits, all the programs that our office oversees, environmental reviews, and just people questioning, is their home on a register or not? And so what Congress does is alleviates some of the pressure on staff from having to manually go through paper files and everything for that. So the goals for Congress were to increase and enable statewide cultural resource information access to encourage stewardship and preservation. This also enhances the office's ability to respond to inquiries quickly because most people can actually look it up themselves. And I'll go through how people can see it themselves. And some people have to get access to be able to view the files, whereas everybody can see where the points are. Besides the archaeology, those points are restricted to only people that have the correct education and training to be able to view the archaeology points because they're sensitive, and we don't want people just going around and digging up holes all over the place to try to find valuable artifacts. So the office, so Jenny and Kathy and other members in the office collaborated with Dewberry and to figure out what they wanted the system to look like. They looked at a bunch of other SHPO offices that had online mapping and databases. And here's just a few. It's I could share this with people if they want to see some of these, but I'll skip over that. So what everyone discovered was that we needed 3 levels of viewing. There is the public viewer, which anybody can go to congress.ct.gov to review. Then there's a semi-restricted viewer, which is all the data that's above ground. And it has all the links to the documentation. Most of this documentation is available if it's on the National Register. It's available through the National Park Service's website. So we still hold that data on our side in our databases, but it's also available through NPS too. The state and local documents are on our servers to parse out to people. Some of the local stuff you might be able to find on actual the local historic districts too. And then there's the restricted viewer, which has everything plus everything above ground plus the archaeology points and all the underlying data and scans for that. So during, even prior to COVID, so 2016 was when they started doing all the scans for the southernmost counties along the sound and everything. But during COVID is when they started shipping boxes to Virginia, is where Dewberry is located. And as you can see, there's a lot of boxes they shipped, and they scanned over 20,000 hard copy resources, which end up being just hundreds of thousands of pages of information that they scanned. And then they developed going between partners and what the office needs were. They designed the geodatabase to try to fit what everybody needed to view. So there's a lot of assets that have multiple scans. Some of them will be in a local historic district. Some of them will be in a state historic district. Some of them will be in a national historic district. So they'll have 3 separate scans. Sometimes they'll have 4 or 5 separate scans. So they had to create a database that would be able to allow people to access every single link in PDF. So there's multiple PDF link files or fields in every single entry. It's a table that's probably about, I think it's, I can't even count as high as there's a lot of rows or a lot of columns in it. There's probably about 200 columns, if not more, in the database. And then 200 columns, and we have over, just points alone, over 120,000 points. And so Dewberry scanned all the files, and they did the initial upload. And they mapped out all the points that were not done on the southern portion of the state. And so how we have it set up is there's actually one parent layer, and then on ArcGIS Online, we have individual views. So there's one hosted layer, and then there's the views of of each one, and they're just queried out to allow people to see. So the public, there is no archaeology data being shown on the public side. There's an archaeology grid that shows where there were assets found and where there are no assets found. It doesn't mean that there are no assets in the areas where there aren't found, but there hasn't been any surveys done there. And then the semi-restricted is queried to allow access to the PDF files, and then the restricted layer has everything. And so the nice thing is I only have to maintain one layer, and all the views just take care of querying out everything for me and just displaying the map as it is. So the accessing the documents, this is where there was, I kind of came on board at this point, and this was, and Alfredo helped out a lot with this, and the Connecticut IT department also the state IT department was helping out too. And so we are using an Azure blob to store all the data that we have. And we could not use an AWS due to just security levels that the state wanted to uphold. And so everything is being held in an Azure blob. So we have Power Automate that is redirecting everybody and adding a token to every file. And then and it's also hiding that token, so people can't just go into the Azure blob and look at things. And then it will display the link up for people. And so this is just a real quick view of what the Power Automate looks like. And right now there's probably about 4 or 5 Power Automates running for the Concris viewer for doing multiple processes on it, for loading up files, and then also for surveys and emails and everything like that. So Power Automate is pretty useful for stuff like that. And then let's see if it opens. All right, and this is the landing page for it, and this is the public viewer. So with the restricted viewers, you need a login for. So public viewer is pretty straightforward. You know, everyone's probably pretty familiar with it. Click on a point. This will just give you pretty general data here for everything. Now we got to go back. And then I also have, so the above ground viewer. Now this one will have the links for the PDFs on it. And they're all color coded. So see, there's multiple links for this one. This one has a town survey and the National Register survey on it. And then that's what the documents look like. So the state GIS office was very helpful in helping to get this kind of started. Well, get the application up and running. At the point in time when it first initially started, Alfredo wasn't here. The GIS office was a shell of what it is now. And the support that they've given since they've been on board has been great. It's just without them, the office probably would not have been this far along as we are now. So the strategic planning for how they went through everything was just coordinate with all stakeholders, then get the data as reliable and accurate as possible. And I am still in a major cleanup of a lot of things, since even though a lot of the data is pretty accurate, it was just having an out of state as to someone who has a little bit more local knowledge to look at things and know that they're not in the right spot. So, and then we also have feedback forms where people can submit issues if they find it, where I think some people actually have had in the GIS community have sent me some information where points were in the wrong spots and everything. So the tips for success. There were a couple major hangups that we had initially when we were before we went live, where we went live in January. And the one big thing was Dewberry was testing everything on a commercial product. And then when we brought everything over to the state infrastructure, we have a state products or state infrastructure. So the Azure blob that is commercial does not get along with Power Automate that is a government service. So we had to change over the Azure blob to government blob, and we were able to communicate with the Power Automate to run all the flows, to display the maps and everything, or display the PDFs. And that's where one of the big issues was. And then it's just, know your resources was another thing, to make sure that we were capturing all the data that the people that are going to be using it most will be able to find, access, and have no or as minimal issues to see. And then there's many things that whenever Carl gets done with the 3D stuff, we'll be able to use that for our some of the areas where you cannot see buildings because of tree cover, such as over here, there's this barn, or if they're far off the road, or if the assessor's data doesn't give us a good picture of the building, that 3D data will give us the ability to see with the point cloud, see a building that is pretty close to exactly what the actual form was showing. And then that's about it. I have some links here if anybody wants to email me. And then it was the collaboration between our office, the GIS office, state IT. We have in our office, we have a lot of support with, there's 3 IT guys that are really dedicated to us, and they've been super helpful. And then with the team at Dewberry was just excellent. And then we did also team up with Dewberry for creating another application that's more built off of Survey 123, and that is that's a lot more. The flows on that are pretty crazy, and that one is running for the environmental review process, which is a federally mandated process that has to come through our office if there's state or federal funds involved in the projects.
Very good. Thank you, Kevin. Round of applause for Kevin and his presentation. And we have 9 minutes or so for questions. Any questions from the group? I see some applause coming in. You can raise your hand or you can write it in the chat. Rich.
Yeah, there we go. I'm raising my hand. How you doing, Kev?
Good, Rich. How's it going?
Great. That was very interesting. So, you had said that you're responsible for one of the GIS layers. Is that the archaeology points?
Well, it's actually, so the above ground layer is the one layer that, and I do archaeology points too, but the one layer is like, you just edit the above ground layer, and then that gets parsed out. You have 3 separate ways you could view the layer from the 3 separate applications. And then there's just separate views. So you have one feature service, and then it's parsed out to be viewed 3 different ways. So I only have to edit that top layer, and then it works down with all the different views that we have set up. So, you cut out all the links on the public viewer so they can't see the public viewer.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So
So
it's just
I just am so curious as to like specific like examples for like what you're mapping. Like, what's your typical, I guess, archaeology point or ground level feature that's out there in your map?
So the most part, like a lot of times you'll get data such as, we'll get data such as this sheet here. So this is all above ground. This is a National Register one here. And then there's a list. So you'll have buildings. So you're gonna drop a point on every building. But what I actually end up doing is, some of them will have a list. I'll create we have a template database that will add all the addresses in there, and then I'll geocode the addresses, which will then I'll be able to drop the points into the application. And then for below ground stuff, and then you also get, not parcels, but the districts, which will be polygons. So it's mostly points, polygons, and stuff like that. And then also there are 2 different layers in the archaeology layer. There are point layers, which are giving you individual, obviously, point locations of artifacts, or maybe not necessarily artifacts, but areas. And then there's larger, what they're called CHPCs, which end up being polygon areas. And they've studied and they've done a bunch of test kind of digs in those areas.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah. If you want to see the data, you'll have to request access for the PDFs behind it. Maybe I'll grant it to you.
Okay. If I ask nice, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually a survey 123 on, if you go to congress.ct.gov, and then there is right down at the bottom of the site,
Gotcha.
There's a request to login. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah.
And what kind of verification is needed? Like, is it this somebody is trained or they're a municipal employee, or how do you decide, all right, they're going to get access?
It's all personal. No. Um,
Wow.
so, so for the above ground, it's pretty much, it's kind of public. It's just, we have a certain number of users on, so Alfredo set up a hub, a community hub site, and we have 1,000 users. So we could grant a decent number of like users that don't have already access to ArcGIS Online. For above ground, it's pretty much almost anybody that asks for it will get it. For the archaeology, that is vetted by the staff archaeologists. So they want to make sure that, because it's a little bit more of a, you could have some people being nefarious and digging up some sites that you don't want dug up. And so you have to have certain archaeology criteria to be able to access that data.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jay Miller. Are consultants / submitters going to be asked to use Survey 123 app in the future?
For the environmental review, I'm thinking that sounds like that's the question. Yes, that will be. Yeah. So yeah. So for the environmental review, that went active. So they're not going to take there's a group of 4 people that do the environmental reviews in the office, and they're not taking any more paper. It's all going to have to be going through the digital submission system, which is Survey 123. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Yeah, they would get, because so just on that application, so it went live last, well, it was almost 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, and we have almost 300 submissions already. They get a lot of mail. So when they were getting the mail, they were getting stacks of just documentation and that they had to go through.
Wow.
So now it's going to be, maybe not right now, but in a couple weeks, it'll be a lot more efficient for the staff reviewing these.
That's great.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the group for Kevin? Nick says he just filled out the form, but it was just radio buttons. Nothing about qualification. How? Oh, here we go. So how would you evaluate? Hold on. Nick, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I can just
Thanks.
talk. That's easier. I didn't know how you want to do this, Mike.
That's good. We got you.
Yeah, so I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I've seen a different presentation of yours, Kevin, and I do the. I'm just working on a site for the Coventry Historical Society, and it'd be interesting to access that stuff. But of course, we wouldn't be sharing that. It's probably not available to be reshared on our maps anyway. But I was wondering, what sort of qualification or whatever that you would need. You said it had to be reviewed by the archaeologist, but there didn't really seem to be a place for any comments about that, just like sort of why you were interested in it.
Well, there's on the actual access request survey, there is the SOI qualification, which we have to, so that if you don't have any archaeology background, most likely the staff archaeologist will not okay it. They're going to ask for education, and they're going to request more information from you about why you would need that. But if you're looking at historic preservation on a town basis, that would be just above ground stuff, and that would be grantable to get access for that. And in the staff archaeologist, there's actually a federal law that allows them to determine what people can see the archaeology layers and who can't, by just their needs and their educational background and work history and everything.
Okay, so just if you're a a GIS professional doing this sort of thing, that doesn't sort of qualify. You have to have an archaeology background.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to.
That data is, it could be vulnerable. So
Yeah.
it's stuff that they really look after, and they don't want it being disturbed in a lot of spots. So.
Okay.
And plus, and a lot of it's on private property, so you don't want to necessarily be going out there and digging in someone's backyard either. So.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right, so we are at 10:30. Before we jump into the break, this is our break time. So, all right, well, it's 10:45. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to get right into it. We are here with Jackie, and she's going to present her project, Modern Update to the Branford Natural Resources Inventory. And Jackie, thank you for coming and join us, and it's all yours.
Great. Yeah, thank you. This is more of a web viewer application, not much on super data, so a little different for today. But yes, this is on the natural resource inventory update for the town of Branford. And that's a quick sneak peek right here on the screen. Let's figure out how to go to next slide. I don't know if it's delayed. Oh. All right, so I just want to quickly go over the project team. So once again, I'm Jackie Claver. I work for GZA. I actually sit in the Springfield, Mass office, but I believe we have 4 Connecticut offices, and I would say about 50% of my work is Connecticut, and the other 50% is in Mass. So I was the GIS lead on this project, and we have also some of our team members, Steve Letko, who is the principal, Robin Cassiopo, who was the project manager. And this was created for the town of Branford Conservation Commission. And there was also some assistance from New England Geosystems, who manages Branford's GIS data. So we coordinated with them on this project. So you may be wondering, where is Branford? Branford is a coastal community located in southern Connecticut on the Long Island Sound in New Haven County. It has over 350 offshore islands, including the Thimble Islands, which is a big tourist destination, and I believe there is a very popular brewery of the same name. It's generally a smaller town, a little under 30,000 residents, and I believe that gets a lot more in the summer, as it's just a very touristy area. You can see by the town, it's generally flat, but they do have a little mountain range up here, and you could see it's just so many islands. And I believe this is just like an aerial view. So what is a natural resource inventory? The Connecticut general statute states that a commission could create one for their town, and they're generally updated every 10 years. I don't know how many towns in Connecticut actually have one. It's not mandatory, it's just highly encouraged. So it's generally an inventory of all natural resources in the town, including water, wetlands, soils, geology. It includes open space areas, and a lot of towns include environmental challenges such as sea level rise, global warming, other environmental contaminants. And their first NRI was produced in 2003, and they updated it to kind of a web version in 2013, which you see here on the right. So some quick project background. Branford was looking to update their 2023 version. In the original RFP, they wanted a full rewrite of the entire NRI. They wanted all these new sections. They wanted field studies, but they had a very limited budget for the amount of work we did. And I wasn't too involved in the initial stages, but from what I heard is there weren't a lot of people interested in doing the work because it was a ton of work for very little money. My principal, Steve Letko, who's he's great. He remembered something I showed him, a cool story map a couple weeks prior to when this RFP came up, and he came to me, he's like, what about a digital web experience? You know, you could see on the right, this is what their old NRI looked like. It was pretty plain. It was very technical, couldn't really understand it. So we proposed to them, you know, a digital web experience that could be very interactive, widely accessible to the public, understandable material, And it would be a much lower fee than a complete rewrite because they didn't really need a complete rewrite. A lot of things don't really change. The plant communities are generally the same. Different species come around, but it's still coastal and all that, and geology doesn't change that much. So we didn't really see a need to do a full rewrite, just kind of let's put this online, let's make it interactive, let's make it colorful and fun. So that's what we proposed. So the question was, what format should we choose? We originally thinking a story map, and I started doing it in story map, but I was like, this is not doing what I want it to do. I want it to be more customized. I wanted to add in all these things, and we really wanted it map centric because we wanted people to explore the data. We wanted people to zoom in and stuff. So that's why we chose Experience Builder, as it was just more customized and it just was a lot easier to work with, in my opinion. So getting into the format, we wanted designated pages. We wanted, nice sections on geology, water resources, and I will go to the web application at the end so we could kind of look at it. So we wanted scrollable content. We wanted to do, charts, all of pictures and all of that, because we wanted the mapping to tell a story. We wanted people to zoom in, click on features, zoom around, and we wanted very short, brief paragraphs where anything in blue is links. So if people didn't really know what, a red maple swamp is, they could click on that link and it'll take them to, I think it's Connecticut Deep for that one, help them kind of understand what it more. And we used all publicly available GIS data that is live links. So we didn't clip anything or upload all this giant data. We just directly connected to a lot of data on CT Deep or CT Eco or any of those publicly available data that you don't need to sign in. So we chose that because it would help less on maintenance time. It's automatically updated. We did encounter the problem of when something changed name. I know when we were about to publish this, the new Connecticut parcel layer actually came about, and I had to go through each map and update the layer. So a little bit of a pain, but at least it's the brand new data. And also on pages that have any mapping, we just made sure to include nice, fun photos for people to click on and learn more. So more in the format, we embedded applications as I was going through this. We got really excited and we found all of these fun new topics to add in. So, there's a lot of these standing web applications out there already. We're like, why not add these in? These are created by conservation organizations or the government, and it's great information, and why create something when there's something already there? So that was really great. And this application could be added on as new things come out, could easily add information, add GIS data, so it could be continually updated through the years. And it's also very interactive. We made sure to add in all the fun widgets where you could search, turn on and off layers, print your custom maps, draw on it, so people could really make this their own. And we created this with accessibility in mind. We made sure to use colorblind friendly colors. We usually use these couple here. I would assume they're colorblind because that's what, Esri tells you. And we actually had someone on our team who was colorblind. So we would test it with him and be like, could you see the differences? And he assured us we could. We made sure all the content was for screen readers. We really made non-technical content. And, if there was a word that we thought maybe someone might not know what this is, we had a link to, dictionary definition or some website that is, government website that explain more. And we made sure that we configured it to be viewable on phone, tablets, and desktops, because not everyone has a laptop or a giant screen. So yeah. So what are some issues we encountered? We were dealing with a full volunteer board. So they were great, but they were very slow. I think we got awarded the contract in last April, but we actually didn't execute and start work until late June. And they were like, oh, we'd like this done in 3 months. And we're like, that's probably not going to work, but we will try. Because there was too many cooks in the kitchen. They were all a great team, but a lot of them were naturalists or biologists. So we would send them our drafts and they would be like, oh, this is too little information. We need to expand. And then they would send me back an email with 2 pages of information. And I had to cut it down and kindly explain to them that this is more for the general public. And we want to really make this more understandable to people instead of having 3 pages of all of the plants in town and all this crazy information. So that was interesting to deal with, but we eventually made everyone happy in the end. Some other things we encountered was just generally just experience builder. It's interesting. I haven't had much experience in it, but there's a lot of quirks. You could see here, this is supposed to be a full photo, but it kept cropping it out. I would try to make it bigger and then it would work and then it wouldn't. So I, tried the best that I can. And same thing happened with some of these charts, is that I don't know why I get what they're coming from with having all these different options, but I just wish it would shrink and expand like a normal website. And I hope that's the future for Experience Builder, because I had to create a lot of empty white space because I would be, at a big screen size, and then I would shrink it down. And then at a small screen size, it would just kind of cut off a lot of information. So that was pretty interesting. And then same thing happened. We were doing it for a tablet and phone because we really wanted this accessible to everyone, is that it just took an incredible amount of effort and time to just configure everything and put things to pending and duplicate. And that might cause some issues down the line where we want to update a section, but then we have to update it on desktop version, tablet version, phone version. So interesting. I'd love to know what other people are doing for this, because I really struggled with these configuring the screen sizes and stuff. So what was the response? The client loved it. We gave it to them as like a general first draft in November of last year. Did some updates over the winter, and then we officially gave it to them and they sent it out to the townspeople, internal townspeople in January. So that's where you see this little spike here. And then we didn't really have a little slow motivation of the client was you just got to keep they got full-time jobs. So we just got to keep bugging them. So we officially had, I would say, kind of a release in May of this year. And we're still working on the marketing. We're really hoping to get some articles out there to really push this, because I think it's a great tool, and we really hope that, other towns will adapt this versions like this, and it'll be used for naturalists and planners and educators in the town. So we're hoping to get more people to click on it because it's so little, but we will see once we get the marketing out. So what are some takeaways? I thought Esri's UC logo for the year is, together we can leverage the power of geography and GIS and unite the world and create a better future. We really want to leverage this to kind of for more big, large reports, to make them into these web applications that more people could look at, because we create all these town master plans and conservation projects, and we spend all of this money for these projects, but does anyone actually read that 120-page report? Probably not. Maybe some people do, but the normal people will just look at the first page and be like, eh. But, if we create something like this, nice, fun web application with pretty photos, maps, and links, people might be more prone to actually go through and scroll through it. And the other key thing is support from senior people for GIS is key. The only reason this project came about is that my supervisor is great. He loves GIS. He loves to know what the new things are. He's not a GIS person, but you know, he made maps in the day and I would show him all these new things. So he remembered that and was like, hey, let's start incorporating these things into projects. And that's always great. So I will get into the link and you've got my contact information there. You could scan it if you want to go on the phone, but I will send the link in the chat. Let me see how to stop this presentation. We'll pull up. All right, do you see website? I don't know. I'm assuming yes.
I
Okay,
see it, yeah.
I'll see it. So this was the old version, just a quick look. It's just, I don't think there's any photos.
Yeah, ouch.
And then so you can just see how technical this is, just so much words and just high level stuff that is needed, you know, it's great, but non-biologists won't really understand this. So we really tried to pare down the information. We added photos, and most of these photos were taken from a local photographer. So that was great to get local photos. So this is kind of the structure, you know, paragraphs, photos, you know, more information. You've got the map. You could zoom in, turn on and off layers. We added some new sections that were there. We thought it was important that maybe people should, oops, sorry, I'm a little slow here, my internet at home. You know, citizen science was great. People could look to where they could volunteer. I believe this one is where we included some really nice existing web applications. You've got this climate one from Roar. I don't know who Roar is. From Circa, actually, yes. So that's great. Fun little things on the side. I believe this was from NOAA, but you could get like really, really lost in here. We got a little carried away with finding all these fun things. So we put in videos and links and all that. And I believe here's another Circa one. And then at the end, there is a overall mapper. So if people wanted to see, you know, how rare species and land cover, they could click those on. And how I kind of clipped the data was interesting, is that there's some settings you do in Map Viewer that you could like kind of clip it to the town with actually clipping the data. So we made this option if people wanted to see what is in the neighboring towns, they just kind of click that button and it unclips everything. But I did note, you could see here that the way to clip it is that you had to have a fill, which was kind of annoying. If you did it with just the boundary, it didn't work. I don't know why, but you had to have some type of fill. So that's why everything kind of looks a little shaded in some respects. So, but yeah, that's a fun little project we had, and I'm hoping to do more of these because they're fun, and I just think we should be creating all these giant reports. We should have them more of a shortened version so general people could look at them more. But yeah, wondering if people questions. I will. Not the only one with that problem. I'm assuming you're talking about, Bruce, the configuring. It's not fun. I'm really hoping to Esri figures it out in the future, because it's just so annoying. You could see, like, the screen I have right now is giant, but if I were to make it smaller, you just see how it cuts things off. So, you know, tried my best. You can't make everything work. But
looks
yeah.
great though, either way. Thanks.
Great work, Jackie. Thank you for your presentation and showing us your map viewer and tool. I really love the vibe of focusing on accessibility and public access to information. Congratulations to stand up to your board That is a challenge. You got leadership and they want something, and our initial response is yes to please, but you clearly had a goal and values and you stuck to them, and I applaud you for that. I think there's a lot that that often gets missed, especially in our line of work. You folks go into university, they get trained, they see kind of like the academic approach, and that to them feels like the whole story. And I think we miss out on this very important part, which is this public consumption of our information. And
Yeah.
so to see you moving with that mindset, that's very good. I know at WestCOG, we have more emphasis than ever to do that, because we had plans that are like 300 pages long. No one is going to read that. And not only that, it's a deterrent. We hand them a 300-page report and they go, what do they get, it's not friendly to use, but a nice streamlined map viewer, storybook, or app that can really deliver on that as well. And I know what I found too is that I stuff everything in the appendix. Like if someone wants to nerd out, I just stuff it in the appendix. I'm like, there is an option for you, nerd out, it's there.
Yeah.
And then you have the public facing stuff. So I'm so glad that you're taking that approach. Any questions from the group on Jackie's presentation?
Like there's one in the chat. Were there any limitations you ran into by using publicly available data? I'd say not really. There was a little bit of a challenge. There's a lot of Esri subscriber inclusive content that I couldn't use. So I had to go the back. I believe that was for, I struggled with the wetland layer. So I had to find like a back end way to do it. I would say that was one of the main limitations was just, inclusive data that you had to have a sign in. But most people don't have an ArcGIS sign in. So I just made sure to not use any data that you needed to sign in. But this was pretty basic data. We were just using stuff that was based on, Connecticut Eco or CT Deep, because there really wasn't a reason to. We did use the Branford zoning data, but we got that from their GIS consultants, so that wasn't a big deal. But supposedly in the future, they're looking to do field surveys, so we would hope to, update that into the application and whatever else they're looking to do. So we hope to be a living document. We didn't really have the challenge of Branford had their own ArcGIS online that they have through their GIS consultant, but I could see we're running into that issue with some new things where we want, we want to create these things for projects, but Esri's got their whole new thing now, project service delivery, or I don't fully know. I'm not in the IT side. I just do the work. But I guess you're not supposed to give logins to people on your network or all that. So that could be an issue, is that it's really best for places that have their own already existing ArcGIS online account. Because if you were to create one for them, I don't know, I think it's like starting $3,000, and that's a big project killer right there. So I would say that's kind of a limitation too.
Very good. We have a question from Charles Vittich. How do the Planning and Zoning Commission and inland wetland agencies use the data?
I don't really know how they would use it. I guess they could just, look at the wetland, they'd zoom in to see if someone has an application to something, they'll just use it kind of like the web viewers online, just to see, are there rare species in this area? Are there wetlands? This is a tool for them to be, another reminder that, when someone wants to build a house, maybe they should take a look at this, or one of the, general viewers that are out there. But I think it's just more of, an information thing. They spent all this money to create this natural resource inventory in the future, and this is just kind of make it more accessible. But yeah.
All right. And that, Charlie, led me to another question that I want to follow up on the idea of usage. Now, do you get usage statistics? How in depth are those, and how have you been utilizing them yet? So are they like kind of digging in, saying people are logging in with their phones, they're logging in on their computer, they're spending 1 minute, 10 minutes? Are they navigating to all the pieces? Are there some sections unused at all? Are they, does it show like where their eyes are? I'm not gonna know where their eyes are, but where
That
they
would be
are.
interesting. I don't really know. For one, we haven't really, we gave it to them earlier this year, but they're very slow people. So we've been hounding them to just be allowed to start marketing on this because not many people know this exists. I was just on their website earlier trying to find, to see where people could find a link to it. And I had to I found it and then the link didn't work and then I found it somewhere else. So for right now, we don't have good statistics, but I feel like in the future, when this gets more out there, try to get it to educators and, more townspeople, I hope, just to see maybe we could see how long people are on here and how to tailor it better.
Okay.
But yeah.
I don't know if you've done this. Just one quick tip, because we have a map viewer. We try to share it to the public and we get usage statistics. We get our biggest hits when it is posted on the town Facebook page or like when it's shared by the town.
Yeah. Yeah.
People follow that. They got a social feed. We got a lot of hits for that.
Yeah, that's on our plan list, but we're trying not to overstep the town, but it's starting to get to the point where it's just like, you paid for this thing. I think people got to look at it because it's been months. So I'm really trying hard to encourage them to post to places, but they're volunteers, so they try their best.
Very good. Alfredo has a hand raised.
I do. So based on the kind of all of the layers that you used for this and kind of with the exception of seemingly the zoning, are many of these only limited to Branford, or are these all statewide or national-wide layers that you use and then kind of filtered down to be just Branford? My question being is I wonder how much effort it would be to do this for everyone.
It's all public, it's all live linked. So I made it look like it's clipped, but it's not. It's all feature service layers from, Connecticut Deep, Eco, Fish and Wildlife, but you could easily just change the town. So I have it all set up that if we were to do this again, it would take a lot less time because I would just change it from Branford to, New Haven or something like that. So it would just be a couple little clicks and I already have maps set up. It'd just be more of changing the language and stuff like that.
I guess my question is, were there any layers aside from say the zoning that were very specifically only Branford
No, everything's just whatever's just out there that I just happen to find. But yeah, Branford doesn't really have much. I think they had some trail data, but it wasn't much different than anything else. So it's just just use what's online.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I used to work with New England Geosystems and helped to digitize Branford back in the day. So I'm well aware of what they have.
Oh, if you know if they have more layers, I'd love to add them, but
yeah, there's not a lot
much.
more. It's just kind of why I was asking. I don't know if there were any specific wetlands delineations or things like that. I just thinking about the scalability of an application like this for something statewide, because that might be something that we might pick your brain and maybe kind of try and do at the statewide level.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I think there was a few other questions.
Yeah, there was one about trying to find your map resource, and they're struggling to find on the website. And I will concur. I just took the challenge. I was not able to find it either.
You can't find it. So when you search natural, resource inventory in Branford, you find this link, but then it leads to nowhere. So you actually have to go on the town website in the search box, type it, and then find it. So we're trying to get on their case to make this easier to find because it's such a cool tool and I want people to see it. So but problems we run into.
Yes.
You can only help so much. I'm dedicated enough, but some people would just be take the paycheck and kick out. But I'm proud of this and I want people to see it. So
yeah, it's the final step, right? All the data's been collected, researched, studied. I need people to actually see it. I agree.
But yeah, feel free to let me know if anyone's got any questions after this. I could put my email in the chat, but yeah.
Thanks a lot, Jackie. Great presentation. You are right on schedule for our next talk, which is going to be Carl again. So let's see. Carl, you're there. Good. Carl will be presenting modern update to the Branford. No, lessons learned from conducting a quality assessment. Okay, take it away, Carl.
All right. Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the quality assessment and quality control work on the statewide collection of Lidar and imagery. These are very large data sets, and we had a lot of public participation. And I think that there are critical lessons for all of us when we think about acquiring or making these big data sets that we hope are going to be authoritative. Mike, can you see the slide change?
Yes,
Okay,
it's
good.
there.
Yeah, so I am from the GIS office, and it was founded in 2022. I know Alfredo's on the call. That part of that was creating a GIO position. Our mission includes critical tasks related to data acquisition, infrastructure support, standards, and coordination. And generally, if you have any questions about anything you've seen, send me an email. We're also going to be talking to people in the near future in the regions as well. So if you have ideas or thoughts about what GIS should look like in Connecticut, let us know. All right. So first thing is, after a long process, we are getting data. We've completed the imagery QA/QC process, quality control, and we now have the true ortho imagery, which is the ortho-corrected imagery for downtown areas and bridges. This is not yet a service, but we are going to make a service in the next several weeks. So you will start seeing information about that very shortly, going out to everyone. We hope you use it. It is a very high quality. There's some spectacular areas, especially in the Northwest and Northeast. We'll get lots of use out of it as a state. We also getting Lidar. Lidar is probably going to be shipped in a derivative product, but we do have high resolution Lidar. This is called QL1 Plus, which has impacted the project itself, and I'll discuss more about that. But it is very, very detailed and very high quality. So, started with a little bit of overview, but I'll kind of finish that. We have two capture dates. We're going to have 2023 and 2026. The 2023 is obviously finished. The data is rolling out. There are a few non-standard products. Non-standard being not conventionally flown or captured at the state or county level. One was QL1 or higher density LiDAR, which is, I believe, 10 to 15 points per meter inland and up to 20 on the coast. We also got 2D buildings that were created from LiDAR as opposed to optical creation. And then we have, again, the true ortho imagery, which basically allows you to see around entire buildings. When you get a chance, look at New Haven. Instead of seeing the side of the building, you'll see all the way down the street level, which is very useful for a lot of different urban planning applications. Critically, these discs are huge, and you'll see a slide on this in a moment, but there's multiple levels of quality control. And this is an important thing to keep in your back of your mind. When you're dealing with very large data sets, you need to have ways of validating the data because of the size. No one can do all of it. So we have the vendor doing work on their own internal processes. We had a quality control subcontract where we're working with a vendor, and then we had ourselves and the GIS community. The original timeline was to have this project finished at the end of 2023. Did not happen. Instead, it's going to be in the next, they'll be rolling out in the next couple months. So what kind of caused this delay? Mostly it was a quality of data and production issues, and that's some of what this presentation is about. So to think about how the data was delivered, basically the state was broken up into three parts: the Northwest, the Southwest, where WestCOG is, the middle, where there's a huge number of buildings and a lot of urban area, and then the east, which was very large, but had very smaller number of buildings and GIS layers. So this was done strategically initially because the first block didn't have any true ortho sites and had a relatively small amount of urban area. And the idea was that the process would improve before we got to the southeast and southwest and south central parts of the state where we have huge urban populations. Unfortunately, there were some delays, so it got out of sequence. But this was the kind of the initial format for the data delivery. So this data is remarkably large. We have 23,000 tiles over these 4 blocks. We have 2.3 trillion, that's with a T, pixels, over 2 data sets and 7 bands. 177 billion Lidar points over 11 or 12 classes. 36 million elevation pixels at 0.1 foot accuracy. 1.9 million buildings, 1,000 miles of rivers, streams, of coastline, and 3,700 ponds. So just take a moment to think about those numbers. How do you evaluate those? So that's what we're going to talk about the rest of this presentation is you have these massive data sets. How do you understand them? How do you feel confident in your output? How do you work with a vendor on this concept? And then what is hiding in these numbers? These numbers are so huge that errors can be there even with a quality control process. And just to kind of put in perspective how big these numbers are, if you just review 1% of the 1.9 million buildings, that's still 19,000 buildings. And if you review 0.01% of the Lidar points, that's still 17 million Lidar points. These are incomprehensibly huge numbers. And so we have to have a rational process to trim out as much error as possible. Okay. So here's the kind of gross timeline and critical steps for the QA process. Again, we had different people involved, the subcontractor, the vendor, our office, and the GIS community. The first critical step was in the procurement is having standards. And I'll continue to emphasize this, but standards create a baseline for both the processing and the output. You need to have a timeline that you can validate with the vendor. And I'll talk a little more about that. You use a pilot study to check on the baseline quality and definitions of the data. You need to determine what are your priorities based on the pilot and what you know about the standards, what the priorities are, because you want to spend more time on data that has is less commonly used or less commonly produced and has less standards and specifications. And then finally, there's this elaborate dance between the review process and the rectification process of the vendor. And then, of course, you validate and accept it. So there's this whole, all along the vendor and the contractor, the contract holder, that's us, have to interact and solve problems that come up. All right. So I mentioned a little bit about this, but the kind of general critical approaches to the methodology include the first was using the pilot to identify errors. And it turns out in the pilot that both the buildings, the building footprints, the 2D building footprints, 3D building footprints, and the true ortho were problematic. Turns out those remain problematic. And that's the lesson here, is that if there's a non-standard product and the vendor's having issues with it, it'll probably continue until you have the problem solved. We use the consolidated single web environment for the QA process, and that allowed all of the data to be in one location. This was a sort of a distributed review, which I'll talk about a bit again more. The goal is to hit between 1% and 5% of locations to look for systematic errors. Again, we're talking millions or billions of data points. You can't look at everything. The idea was to look at specific locations. Use automation where possible. And also, you'll need to trust the process. Critically, you'll also have to understand which workflows the vendor has vetted in the past and which do not. And so critically, you'll want to talk about the chain of logic in the new workflows. Okay. So diving a little deeper into this kind of tiers of QA, we had a vendor. The vendor did a lot of internal checks, and they have a very good reputation in Lidar and imagery, and generally that was true. Their Lidar and imagery was excellent quality. But we also asked them to do a couple new things, which was use denser data and create these newer products that they had less experience with. They had a subcontractor that was supposed to independently work with them. We had our office, and then we had in this distributed review, we had the GIS community. It's a long list of all the people who participated or tried to participate. I thank every one of you. Your roles were appreciated and really helped us do more work and hit the things we needed to. And as part of that quality process, you needed to address, the vendor needed to address the two major sets of standards we use, which is the ASPRS and the USGS Lidar standards. And finally, again, we needed to understand if there are errors in the data, despite having these multiple levels of quality assessment. So interestingly, between the vendor, the subcontractor ourselves, not every location is actually viewed. So the vendor is supposed to look at something up to 50% of the site, but they never visually inspect all of the data. And for buildings, for instance, a lot of that work is automated. So they didn't actually put a visual review of that. The subcontractor was supposed to do about 25%, and the same. They also didn't see everything, but they used a visual approach. And then ourselves and the GIS community that helped out, we were supposed to look at 1 to 5%. Again, we focused the GIS office in the urban areas where we figured to be the most problems. And then we requested the GIS community to work on areas that they had the most experience with, so that if there are problems found, that they would be best served to identify them. So each of the for each of the errors found, there was generally a different person who found it. For the georeferencing and spatial accuracy analyses done for the initial flight, turns out that was very good quality. We had the 2016 data behind us, and that proved to be accurate, so that didn't require any further work. In the pilot, building and true ortho were identified. The vendor found some of that. We also identified that through our visual review. The imagery, some of the errors, and including this banding that was found in the near infrared, were found by the vendor. We, both the GISO and our stakeholders, found a lot of localized problems like glinting in the and dark banding area. The Lidar itself was exceptionally good. The few errors that were found were typically found by us. And then we found many of the building errors, which was the biggest headache in this project. And again, going back to the slide, critically, there was no single person who looked at all of the data. A lot of that was done in a semi-automated fashion. So you need to have someone who can look at it, who can understand the errors when you see it. And finally, on the true ortho, there was a problem with warped buildings, and the vendor did that. So each of these, every person involved in the QA process had a role in finding at least some errors. And that's why it's really a team effort, the quality control, and why you have to work together with the vendor to get the product you're interested in. So how important are standards? Standards are absolutely critical. We use the ASPRS and USGS primarily. The ASPRS is the technically authoritative resource that virtually everyone in the world points towards. There are a few European standards, but even this is the place you should start whenever you want to say to a vendor, I need these specs. The USGS has production specs, and you'll see that there's some good and bad things about that, but they are standardized. The good thing about using these standardized specs is the vendor has already worked with them in the past. So their whole production process is focused around producing these standard products. They have created the automation, the infrastructure behind them. Now, for the problems came in with these non-standard products, the higher LiDAR density, the buildings, and the true ortho, they had to readjust their software, their hardware, and their staffing to accommodate this. And this required a lot of time and work done on the fly that wasn't accounted for in the original time schedule. Okay. So one of the ways to deal with this question, how do you manage these massive data sets? The first thing is to use some support tools. So one of the things we used were these LiDAR viewers. They allowed you to quickly pick up any of the LiDAR data sets and do a visual inspection on as a single tile. And they're very fast and effective, and they're free. Fugaro Viewer and Q2 Reader are both easily available and nicely used products. To be honest, they're a lot faster than using the ESRI products when they're not, the ESRI doesn't have a tiled data to work with. We also use a tool called LAS tool, and they have a little application in there called LAS Info. The nice thing about this, and you'll see on the right, what they do is they basically summarize all the LiDAR points on the tile. Again, you know, each LiDAR tower has millions of points in it. How do you assess whether there's good or bad quality? Yes, the vendor has inspected them and have their own product review, but how do you get a handle on this? So with the summary, you can look for potential errors. Now, like on the upper right-hand corner, you see that the return value, they have the return value. That's the number of first returns. The first returns were about 65% for this tile. This tile was an open suburban area. So if you have an open suburban area, you don't have a lot of the LiDAR points bouncing around in there. So you would expect to have a high number of first returns. That worked out. You also have these classification done by percentages. In this case, again, there was a fairly open tile. So you had the ground returns classified about 43%, and buildings and vegetation at the appropriate amount for the land cover. So we picked tiles that we use these aggregation tools with and allowed us to quickly summarize whether there are any gross or systematic errors in the LiDAR. I mentioned another critical tool to help with automation was the use of this QA portal that Dewberry created. Is very useful. It was very helpful with having a distributed review model. Unfortunately, you have, you know, the owner of this, that being the GIS office, has to also train people. So you have to have standards for your reviewers to use in their review. So you have to take on a training role, even though you're not the contractor, and creates more work, but it allows you to get more coverage. A thing that's important to learn about this is that the vendor didn't start with all of the most useful data sets. So you have to be aware of things like the intensity raster, the first return raster. There are a bunch of things that the USGS produces that are part of the standard products that weren't added that make the review process much easier. So knowing your specs in a close and detailed fashion is important. All right. I mentioned that you have to do preparation as the user to do this. So the first thing is that you have to go out to other people with experience. We did that, including the state of New York, which was they were very helpful because they do a lot of their own internal review. You have to then create recommendations for your own users who are going to review the products. And I spent a lot of time synthesizing documents to come up with a list of things that we should care about and look for. And then you always have to be aware of what the goals are for your products. Who's going to use them in the end, and what's acceptable and what's not. All this requires both some automation, but also visual inspection. The visual inspection process finds the things that aren't covered by specs. Generally speaking, the data errors covered by specs are generally good. But you need people who can identify unusual patterns, such as this near infrared banding issue, where the one side of block 1 and one side of block 2 near believe that was through Milford, the tonal values were different, and that wasn't caught initially. And then you see the glinting in the middle, the dark area off the hill on the side, and then a large variety of all the building problems that we had, including some places where vegetation interfered with the returns from the rooftops. So now in the remaining time, I'm going to talk about some of the unexpected things that come out of the standards. The first thing is that the Lidar error rate was incredibly low, far less than 1%. So I think that speaks to the importance of having proven processes. Yes, the vendor took a little more time with the more dense data set, but the quality was extremely high. What I hadn't expected was that because we were using the USGS specs, we were using some new products that I hadn't seen before, and those were very, very useful for the helping automate or create more speed in the review process. One of them was a thing called the SSI, which is the inner width alignment. Basically, it allows you to inspect whether you have the correct amount of overlap in a flight. You have this MSHR, which is basically the maximum surface raster. That's the first return raster, and that's the green one here in the upper left-hand corner. If you don't see any points floating in weird spots, you know you probably have a correct classification. And then we have the intensity raster, which was incredibly cool data set, which is the return raster of the return of the laser back to the instrument. And what it gives you is a geometrically accurate raster with some reflectance values, so you can see the land cover and land use differences. This was actually used as the basis for the building footprint data. So that was a good supplemental data set. Here's an example of a, I got about 6 or 7 minutes, right, Mike, for questions?
Well, you did ask for a shorter block, so schedule-wise, but it sounds like you're able to use the full 20-minute block. So,
all right,
feel free to.
I'll move through a couple of these and wrap it up.
There's no one after you.
Okay, I'll shorten up the rest of it.
Okay.
But there are some. We'll do a couple of interesting ones, then we'll go to the recommendations. Okay. So the USGS standard had a 30-meter width for a river polygon data set. And this produced some incredibly good data for the major rivers in Connecticut. Unfortunately, because it was somewhat arbitrarily limited to 100 feet, places like this, you have the Pomerog River coming up, and it just is cut off. Yes, it's following the spec, so the spec is true, but it doesn't complete the river up to the state line. So we didn't fully understand the implication of the spec, and we didn't fully vet the collection goal. So the spec is correct, but the data is not as good as we would have liked. And I'll mention one more of these good spec, bad outcome problems. And this is for the digital elevation model. The digital elevation model is tremendous. It's going to be incredibly valuable for all of us. It's 2-foot pixels. Part of this was to have a raster, you'll be able to use this with a raster flow model. And the raster flow model allows you to model a water flow throughout the state. Now, the idea, according to the spec, is that at saddles are set at bridges. In Connecticut, the difference between a bridge and a culvert is very arbitrary because we're in a hilly bedrock state. So you can see here in the upper part, you have one example where you have the gap in the flow line burned out correctly. And the other one, you have it kept there. It turns out that's also correct, but if you're trying to run a water model on this, it won't work. So we have this great data set that's limited by the specifications for a saddle to be burned out at a bridge. And so only in some places across the state do you have these. So we're going to have to go in and retrofit this. And just to show you what this looks like, the difference between the different types, a buried bridge, an arch culvert, and an arch bridge. Only one on the right is considered a bridge. Only the one on the right would have been burned in correctly. These are not, the spec was met, but the product is not as good as we would have liked. Let's see. I did want to briefly mention about the issues related to the building footprint, because this is the hardest product. There were a lot of errors found in the pilot in block 1. A lot of these had to do with trees overhanging buildings, which caused the model to be the 2D model to be produced incorrectly or with error. The two biggest errors were this misshapen error and these fused building errors. We did not have correction language in our contract, and this meant we could only come up with a partial solution. The vendor did agree to fix conspicuous public buildings and look at our errors, but we didn't have a full solution to fix all of the buildings in the state. The agreed upon solution, and again, this is very intermediate, was that Dewberry wrote a thorough review of the strengths and weaknesses of the building footprint and the possible sources of error. We will submit that to the users when we release it, but it did not solve all of the problems. We did get after the iterative process to improve the building footprint. We have gotten some very good outcomes with limitations. So when you're working with a vendor, it's a tango. You have you need to cooperate, shame, and do a little bit of both. So let's return quickly for the conclusion about what do you do when you have these massive data sets, and how do you address the quality. First thing is to talk to other people who've done it. Next, use of automation and standards. Standards create known workflows, and you can have assurance that the vendor won't have to create things on the fly. If you're using non-standard products or new products, make sure you add time and budget for those things. Query the vendor about how they're going to solve their software, hardware, and personal issues. Prioritize data sets where you're most likely to have errors. That's the critical part of the pilot. Look at all the data sets yourself unless you have a trusted vendor. Communicate with your end users, and then use your subcontractors effectively. That's something we will do a better job on the next round. So with that, I'll leave you with a few references and any questions.
All right, thank you, Carl. Carl said he had a shorter presentation, and I was like, I challenged that, but but I appreciate your lessons learned, and we are now ready to take some questions. All right. So, Nick, would you like to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask?
Yeah, so it's, kind of summarize it for me, it sounds like we have some new data sources that are cool because we've never had these types before, but we ran into some limitations, so we've learned some lessons. And you think, how can that be applied to the 2026 imagery? I'm sure you guys will be thinking about this over the next couple of years as well before that begins, right?
Well, it's actually going to happen much sooner than that. In fact, it started. We're doing that right now.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why there are more slides here than I originally had thought about. So a couple of things. I would say the Lidar is exceptionally good, and we had someone was Andrew from ESRI, who was their their 3D visualization guru. He praised this data set. So the Lidar is very good. It came from a proven process. The elevation data set, with the exceptions I showed, which are based on the specifications, also incredibly good. Imagery overall, with the exception of the banding problems, which have been corrected, are, thanks, Alfredo, Arthur Carford, are exceptionally good. In some places, I would describe as excellent, especially in the Northwest and Northeast. They're incredibly nice and high resolution data sets. The true ortho data is going to be spliced in. So for the 2023 data, you'll have it. That was a big time problem for the vendor. We think that they've developed internal processes that should speed that up. And lastly, the building footprints. the data has improved. Probably the worst locations right now are in the old urban areas where there's some fusing of buildings. We are going to have, we are fortunate to have another tier of QA control, which is probably going to happen where there's going to be a land cover. We're working on a land cover product, and that company is going to provide some edits to the data. So we hope once that part is done, and it was a little too early to talk about, but that should provide some additional improvements to the building footprints for the next go around. And so, again, it's a bunch of different people with different skill sets looking at the data set, finding new errors, and then working with a vendor to improve the process. And hopefully, by the time we get to things as services, you'll have a lot of products that are very useful.
So, say like that sounds good. Say like a year goes by, and you get through the whole process, and then somebody's working in a town and be like, oh, they find a cluster of buildings, and maybe they'd like them corrected, and this is something that the user could manually correct. Would they be able to submit edits to you guys so that everybody be able to use that data? Is there any? Could we do something like that?
We have talked about it. We don't have a full solution. I think that because we're going to have this land cover extraction process for impervious cover analysis coming, that would be something that would occur after that process. Because what's going to happen is this new land cover product that we're going to acquire is going to probably improve the building footprints another notch. And so it doesn't make sense yet to have an iterative improvement process that the towns can help with until after that. Then we can potentially talk about that. The first thing is to go through this additional round of QA QC.
Carl, so we got some shots fired. Aaron Nash wants to know, hey, do you think next time sacrificing limiting or some of the extra products so imagery can be delivered in a timely manner? Is there a trade-off between features and execution of schedule for release?
Yeah, I think that there is a trade-off. As I said, the standardized products have less problems, and but the good news is that we've already worked through all the infrastructure issues that the vendor had. We are talking about, we haven't decided on what is going to happen with the additional products. There will be a timed crunch at for the next data set, and that's something we are going to start addressing soon. So, Aaron, I'm punting on that partially. Alfredo and I need to talk about that. And as Alfredo noted, we are not starting over at the beginning for these other products, but they're going to probably be supplementary or derived, so they should require less time. Let's hope that improves.
Would it make sense to wait on doing some of this feature extraction till the 2026 imagery now that this stuff is kind of over a year outdated? I mean, we're going to spend money on a product
there's a financial issue that we need the contract needs to be finished. So I don't think that can work. I hear what you're saying regarding that, but we have a limited budget window to operate in.
Gotcha.
All right. Any other questions for Carl?
And Aaron, if you want to talk to myself and Alfredo, we can talk about this more, and we more in depth because I know you're intimately involved in the data creation process.
Okay,
that's excellent. All right. Well, Carl, you're also getting a shout out from Patrick. He's very happy with the data and resources.
Just a quick one.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned independent. I had seen something about independent GIS people getting involved previously, but I kind of spaced it. Is there any opportunities for the future for independent consultant to be?
We are going to have to look at 3D buildings. So yes, there might be one more opportunity to get involved, and then of course we have 2026 coming not too far down the road. So yes, there'll be future opportunities. And you guys, reach out to any one of us or send me an email directly, and I'll be happy to get you involved.
And that's probably something too you could advertise on the listserv.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Carl. All right, everybody. Hey, I just posted a whole bunch of links because we are closing out the summer webinar. Rich, how do you think it went? Success?
Absolutely. This is great. I think I counted like 67 was the highest number of attendees.
That's impressive.
Was this like a record? I don't know.
It's a record for the summer, I think.
I think it's because it's raining out, right?
Yeah, people are at the beach. All right. So for those, thank you for joining us today. We have those links in the chat for GIS Day registration. Do not miss out on that. I mean, as far as free events go, I think it's the best. Hyper biased. We got the list survey if it's signed up, Women in GIS, and of course the GIS Network Discord channel. So get in there, get connected, talk to some GIS geeks. We love talking about it. So get at it. Okay, so that concludes today's webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thanks for attending.